It was so cool.
Well, we're gonna get started, and I'm going to introduce Cara to you. And Cara and I just kind of had a little bit of encounter coming and going. So you all probably know her better than I do because we grew up in this congregation. Is that correct? So I will leave things to you. We are recording this, so if you can be mindful of that as you walk past the camera. If you don't want your profile recorded, you can Google zip. Welcome and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cara Meyers. As was introduced, I did grow up in St. Mark's, so I'm really happy to be here today. This is actually the second time that I've been talking about the Mozambique School Lunch Initiative. I presented, I think, like maybe 4 years ago. So I'm excited to give some updates. Before I give kind of updates, though, I'm just going to give a brief history of how this all started so that those who don't know, know why I'm even talking about Mozambique in the first place, a country in sub-Saharan Africa, right across the channel from Madagascar. People want kind of a visualization of where that is. So I first moved to Mozambique in 2013. It was my first job out of college. I was working for an organization called Samaritan's Purse, which is a Christian relief and development organization. And I did a bunch of different random projects. I was working on a livestock project, I worked on a water and sanitation project, and learned a lot about the country, but also made some really great friends, including this woman here named Talvina. So she was the cook at the organization, and so usually around meal times I would just be hanging out with her at the kitchen and got to talking a lot. And she was 9 months pregnant, and so I then spent a lot of time with her at her house, actually went to the hospital with her when she gave birth, and got to meet her beautiful daughter, Rosie. In the arms there, you can't really see much other than the head. But she is now a beautiful 9-year-old girl, and her middle name is Cara, or Carla as I was known, so she kind of got, she's my namesake in a way. In talking with Talvina, and even after I left Mozambique, we kind of really had this strong friendship. And in 2016 or so, there was a big drought in Mozambique. And we just kind of, in conversations with Talvina, she would tell me about how kids were dropping out of school because they were too hungry to go to school. And this really kind of just struck a chord, and it really just made me think, gosh, we got to do something, or maybe can we do something? Like, we can't solve the whole problem, but is there something we can do? Talvina has this cooking experience, why don't we just start a little school lunch program? So I'm like, okay, Talvina, do you think we can do this? And she's like, yes, sounds like a good idea, but let me talk to my our colleague Roberto. So Roberto was the third person that I had also known when previously working at Samaritan's Purse. And he, was in charge of human resources and project management and knew a lot of things. And so she's like, he's going to be really helpful. Let's bring him on board. And so, without further ado, I'm going to let him actually give a quick overview of what the project looks like now. And then I'll go more into explaining and talking through some of those things. So last month I was in Mozambique, and in October, November, and one of the amazing things was that we won this prize for our work, and one of the parts of that was they sent a film crew to come make a little documentary of our work. So this is a short 3-minute video that kind of discusses a little bit of the work in Mozambique.
In Mozambique, we have a beautiful country, but people suffering of hunger, people suffering of illness. 43% of the children in Mozambique are malnourished. When the head of the family, for instance, died because of HIV/AIDS, then the family cannot afford to have food. The children will stop going to school. One of the reasons because now the mother wants them to go and do something so that they can have something to bring home to the table. There is a need to help these kids get back to school and also to give them the nutrition they need. The Mozambique School Lunch Initiative, we have farmers that sell us the vegetables. We buy from the local. We give to the children.
Se sungula kurima, hi byala makhombo, hi byala betiraba, hi byala tinyala. Manje ku endla koloko loko swi byarile, swi gabe swi huma kahle, swi saseka hi tlhela hi xavisa.
Not only we are giving like food to the children, or the nutrition to the children, or the education to the children, we are also boosting the economy of the community. This is what we want to do for this community. We wanted to do something that can really boost our project and can help us reach to more schools. So one thing that we saw that is not a junk food could really help was peanut butter. We want the price of the peanut butter to be cheaper than the normal peanut butter that are sold in the city.
Loko ra switolo ra durha ku tlula mpimo, se leri ni ta swi kota ku ni ri xava, ni ta swi kota ku ri xava hi ku leyi liya hi tipureso ya ku.
With the Moz Nut project, we are using peanuts to make peanut butter. We are getting the peanuts from the local communities. We roast them, process them, produce the peanut butter in Shopway. We make peanut butter and we bring it back to the community. It's by Mozambican and from Mozambicans. Those kids that had dropped out of school, they came back to school because they hold there is lunch now in school. And those who were coming once or twice a week, now they were coming every day.
Hikuva handle ka ku ni xavisa xikolweni ntsena la kaya na dya la ni lavaka hi kona, na dya swi ni pfuna, a ni songoli ngopfu hikwalaho ka ku pfuneka hi project.
With the Most Nutri project, we are going to be able to help many children. 43% of the children in Mozambique are malnourished. So with this project, we want to break that cycle of poverty.
Cool.
So, that's a quick overview of a certain angle of our project. So this is kind of Roberto explaining how we have the school lunch program, how we work with farmers, and now our most recent thing, which happened this year, was a peanut butter production, which I can talk a little bit more about. So that's a kind of a brief overview, and I wanted to show that in the beginning because I think they really give a great view of what the schools are like, and you get to know a bit about Roberto because he's been such an important part of this story since we started in 2016. So now I'm going to be less exciting and not have as fancy of a video, but I'll just kind of talk through some photos and talk through some of the way in which this work has grown since 2016 and how we built it from the ground up, basically. So as I said, oh my goodness, that started. Okay. So as I said before, we started in 2016. This was during a drought. This is what one of the communities, this is called Kumba Village. This is kind of what this looks like in the dry season. So it's a very arid area. And again, one of the things that most touched me when we first started this project was that Roberto and Salvina were sending me pictures that this is what the kids were dropping out of school to go forage for. These are roots, they would be eating this root, it's called nafula. And so that was just really it just made a huge impression on me, and I was like, wow, we really need to do something that's better than that. So that's where we started our school lunch program. And we have 2 cooks in each of the schools that we work in. We currently work in 7 schools. And they cook these gigantic pots of food. The food is all locally sourced as much as possible, and is based on Mozambican recipes. So a lot of that is a corn porridge or rice, and then with some sort of stew. So beans or vegetables or chicken are typically the main ingredients. And we work really closely with the teachers who help us a lot. This is a director of one of the schools, and the schools are pretty packed. As you can see, it's really been a great project because it's brought a lot of kids back to school. And so we've even in some schools seen double the number of students attending compared to how the school was prior to the school lunch program. we work in really the most vulnerable communities in this area. So for example, this is a school, actually, one of this, it's just basically a chalkboard under a tree, and it's pretty remote, it's hard to get there, and we were pretty intentional from the beginning of wanting to go to the farthest flung places. Again, this is basically the school kitchen. You can see they cook on firewood. The kids bring a stick every day to school. It's pretty cute if you see them in the morning, like they'll be coming in with their stick and then they drop it off at the school kitchen and then they go to class. And so they all kind of contribute in that way. Here's just a couple of our cooks. Again, I really just want to highlight them because they do an amazing job and this wouldn't be possible without them. They usually get up at 6 in the morning, they go cart water from either the river or from a well, start boiling huge pots of beans, and have just been so dedicated to the project. I mean, we will sometimes show up there at like 8 o'clock at night to deliver something because we got stuck somewhere else, and they're on the side of the road with a wheelbarrow ready to take to the food to the kitchen. So they're really part and parcel of our program. This is just another kind of visual. You can see there's a big pot of bean stew, rice, and then I think here are orange sweet potatoes, and here on the corner are beets. And I really just love seeing the kids and how happy they are when they are eating meals. You can really just tell that it's making a difference in how they feel at school and the energy that they have. And I'm trying to get out of the way because I don't know if you can see, but the photo here is just kind of an example of a typical meal. And it really is just really nutritious food. And so whenever I'm visiting, I always like to eat at the schools with the kids, and I always am left with the impression, wow, that was a good meal. This is the healthiest I've been eating in a while. So that's always wonderful to see. So Dad got the chance to go with me there, yeah, this last visit. And one of the great things is that Talvina, the woman I introduced in the beginning, she is always known in the schools as the mother of the kids. So all of them, like, you know, really know her and go to her. And she found this one kid over here named Ramiro, who's a first grader, and he was born with a genetic defect that just doesn't have legs, basically. And so he was still going to school. His brother would carry him to school every single day. And I was like, well, we need to get him a wheelchair. And so we actually talked to somebody at Shriners Hospital in Spokane, got a wheelchair, brought it to Mozambique, and it was a huge hit. And you can see that he has a lot of kids helping. We had to have a little bit of introduction of, okay, let's not push it too fast, you know. But, you know, and Dad was also even showing him how he can motor himself, which will be great to kind of give him some of that independence. But, you know, I think it's also exciting enough for his siblings to really support him. So those kind of little individual stories are also really exciting for us to see, because we work with about 2,000 children, but there's those individual cases that I think really make an impression on us. This is another student that Talvina just discovered recently. Her name is Lorenza. Talvina took the photo in not the best light, but one of the things that really struck me is that we were trying to identify students that were in, you know, more vulnerable situations, and we found out that she's actually the head of the household. So she's 12 years old, and she has 2 younger siblings, and she's living in this house alone. And so we're now kind of working on trying to figure out, okay, like, can we pair her up with another, like, more elderly women in the community, or how can we provide some more support to these children? Because when we're in these communities, we end up just getting to know each individual person so well, and it's a great opportunity for us to kind of bring a more holistic approach. So then we have the farmer program, which was kind of alluded to. This was an interesting start because basically we were starting the school lunch program, and then we're working in rural communities, and the farmers were like, hey, we would love to be able to sell our crops to you so that you can use them in the school lunches. And that started a whole farmer program where we really tried to also bring better technology to the farmers so that they could produce more. So things like irrigation equipment, better seeds, that kind of thing. This is a big pile of beans that are being harvested. This is bean beating. So this is you'll really get a sense of how difficult farming is when you spend a couple days there. Because to harvest the beans, they basically take the plant, put it on a tarp, and then they beat the heck out of it with a big stick, and the pods are kind of brittle, and so the beans fall out of it and fall to the bottom. And then you can remove the plants from the top, and you'll be left with the beans on the bottom there. And here's another story that really made an impression for me was this is a field after the bean harvest has finished. And there's this old woman out there, and she's not really a farmer that we work with, but she's an elderly woman. And I was out there, and I was like, what is she doing? Like, she's not from, this group. They're like, oh, she's just picking the rest of the beans that kind of have fallen in the dirt. And I was like, oh, because I was talking to one of our team members who leads the farming program. He's like, yeah, it's just like the Bible says. I think actually from Deuteronomy, when you harvest your field, don't go back and take the leftovers. Leave that for the widow, the orphan, the alien. And that was just a visual example of that happening in practice. And so that was also really moving to see. This is just, again, a photo of Roberto because I think it really encapsulates the way we work in the communities. We don't have an office. This is our office. So even when he's trying to send me a report, like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is the way our office works, basically. And this is kind of our bigger team. So Talvina on the right, Roberto, and then the guy in the yellow is Jaime. He does the work with the farmers. So learned a lot about also the difficulty of irrigation. This was another just example of how this project came kind of together organically because this is actually one of our cooks. So she's not a farmer in our program, but one day we just went out to her little garden plot and she's tending some things and then just pulls up this beet. And I was like, I have never seen a beet this big. This is the biggest beet I've ever seen. I guess beets grow well in Mozambique. So then I was like, okay, why don't we incentivize our farmers to grow beets so that we can use them in the school lunch program. So now we have a lot of beets in the school lunches. They get cooked, boiled basically, and then grated and served onto the school lunch. This is also a field of kale or collard greens. I don't really actually know the translation, but it's a leafy green. It's really nutritious that our farmers grow a lot of. And then of course tomatoes. And they bring these crops and sell them to the school lunch program. Now another program that kind of started organically was we were in the schools and we started noticing, the kids would come for school lunch, but we'd also see kids that definitely are not 6 years old, right. Which is this kid right here coming to school. And you're like, well, where is this kid coming from? And Talvina told me, she's like, oh, well, they just come with their older siblings so that they can have lunch. Because they know that there is food at school. And so his brother is obviously sharing his lunch with his younger sibling. And it got us thinking, wow, it would be great if we could actually have a way to provide this nutrition to the younger kids. And so we started a preschool program. We actually got funding from the Roddenberry Foundation, which is the guy who made Star Trek, apparently, who they funded us to build a couple of preschools, and we now serve the school lunch program and also a breakfast in 2 preschools that serve 140 kids each day. And this is just a group of those kids. They're ages 3, 4, and 5 years old. And they are actually learning a lot in school. So another thing that we found really a great opportunity was to give these kids some of that early learning so that they would be better prepared to actually go to school. So I think we all know here that going to preschool makes a big difference when you go to 1st grade. But in Mozambique, it's especially important because these kids are not learning Portuguese at home. So in Mozambique, the national language is Portuguese. It used to be a Portuguese colony, and so all of education is done in Portuguese. But it's not the native language for most of these kids.
That explains the names too. A lot of
of the names like Roberto or Tal, those kind of names are Portuguese names. They have also more native names as well that are usually in their second name. So we started teaching, so we've seen a lot of improvements in their language abilities, even like basic numbers that are also making a big difference for them when they go to 1st and 2nd grade. This is also one of our preschool teachers, and I really love her a lot. Her name is Anacleta, and the reason I just think that she's a great story is because she's one of the only women in her village who's ever gone all the way through 12th grade. And she actually found her, she was still finishing 12th grade. She's only 19 years old in this photo, but we immediately hired her to be one of our preschool teachers because she was basically one of the only people who had that level of education. And she's just been amazing. And it's just a great kind of success story because her family is also just so happy that she has a job, she's in her community. Her parents really worked hard for her to go all the way through 12th grade, and so for her then to finish that and then get a job immediately was really exciting. So she's just a great with the kids and a great preschool teacher. This is another preschool student that we found that is in a similar situation as Lorenza, in that she lives with a 14-year-old sister and the 14-year-old who takes care of the family. So these are communities that have just a really high rate of vulnerability and a lot of orphans. And so that's something that we're really trying to better understand and see what we can do. But I think it also really just speaks to how important the school lunch program is, because when you have that kind of vulnerability or just uncertainty in your life, just knowing that you can go to school each day and have a good meal, I think provides a lot of, just provides a current of stability for these kids and a major source of their food each day. This is the preschool breakfast. So because preschool kids are really young, we also realize that you can't just give them one giant meal. So we split it up into two. They get a little breakfast in the morning. This is a peanut butter porridge. So that was new. You're used to eating this kind of just basic corn porridge, but that's not very nutritious. So we put a couple spoonfuls of peanut butter in there and it makes it delicious. And makes it a lot more nutritious. So finally, the class program that I'll speak to that also evolved kind of organically, and we started this year in February, is a school bus. And you can't quite see the students in this bus. There's probably about 30 of them.
Oh my gosh.
And they're not young kids, so these are actually high school students.
Oh my.
So in the rural communities, the government has schools that go up to about 7th grade. 5th or 7th grade is kind of the last grade. And then to go to the high school level is usually you have to go to town. And that can be about 15, 20 miles one way. And so it's pretty far. And these are, families that don't have cars and there's no bus system in these communities. And so basically what happens is that most kids don't continue on. If you live in a rural area, it's very difficult for you to continue on to past the 7th grade. And so it's been a source of frustration for us for a while because we've had the school lunch program going in the grades 1 to 7, and we've seen that have such good impacts on the kids. They're staying in school, they're learning, but then they was just not have any option to go further than that. And especially for girls, this meant that they often just ended up getting married at 14, 15 years old. And kind of the cycle just perpetuates, right? Because you get married, you start having kids, and then your kids are, you're still in that cycle of poverty. So it was really frustrating to see that. And especially for me, just seeing, these girls have a path that was so limited was really frustrating. So we talked so much with the community. We tried to figure out, how can we do that? How can we come up with a solution? And we came up with the school bus. So the school bus allows the kids to still live at home, but go to school each day. And it's been really, really successful. So when we first started thinking about this, I thought we'd have 26 students, and we have 141. So the school buses are packed. But it's also just been great to see how the community has really bought into the project. So actually the driver of this school bus is the leader of the community. So that's quite interesting for me to find out because first of all, he's quite humble, but he obviously really cares a lot about girls' education as well. And has really worked hard to kind of make sure that this program works in the community and talks to parents and gets them on board. So about 2/3 of the students in this program are girls. We did make it open to boys as well, just because we had demand for it. But we do see more and more girls using the program. So as you can see, they're all getting on the bus, and it's going to be a packed bus, but it works. Now, these are a group of the girls, and this is another program. So we were started running the school buses, But we realized that the girls especially, but also the boys, faced a lot of other pressures at home. As we all know, I'm sure, like being a teenager is a complicated time of your life, and there's a lot of particular health challenges and risks that girls face in these communities. And so we decided to start kind of just club or like mentorship program. So we hired 2 people. Tusha here is the girls' mentor, and we also have a man named Dino, who is our boys' mentor. And they hold bi-weekly meetings with the kids, just to talk about these things that are not really talked about at home, and they're not talked about at school. So things around like puberty or menstruation, or things that these girls don't necessarily know how to navigate on their own, but are really important and actually affect their schooling. So that's been an interesting program to see how that's evolved, and just kind of have this kind of safe space for the girls to talk about things. They also get snacks, which is true to our name as the Mozambique School Lunch Initiative. We also make sure that they are going to school on a full stomach. And this is just an example of one of those club meetings, I guess, where they're kind of talking about different subjects, and they do kind of role play scenarios and get the students involved. This is just one of those groups. And then I just forgot. I keep saying finally, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, we have one more thing. So this is the last thing though. So this year, as Roberto kind of explained in the video, we have a new project producing peanut butter. The idea is that we're producing peanut butter as a nutritious food that can be used for especially really young kids, but we're also selling it in markets, and the idea is that it can hopefully be a sustainable way for us to spread the program even further. Because most of our programs run on donor funding and the generous contributions from people even here at St. Mark's. But of course we have more demand. There's so many other children that we'd like to reach, and so we started the peanut butter project. We're still in the process of learning. So when we first thought of peanut butter, I was like, oh, peanut butter is easy, you just grind peanuts. But you have to roast the peanuts first, which is actually much more challenging than I thought. So this is roasting the peanuts, done in Mozambique. You fill the pots with sand, actually, and so that the peanuts don't burn on the bottom of the pan. And then you kind of roast them until they get done, and then you have to peel them, which is also very labor intensive. Dad was very bad at that. Very, very slow. That is a very labor intensive process. And then once you actually have the clean peanuts, putting them in the machine is a piece of cake, and comes out with really great peanut butter. So that's very nice. Pretty happy about it. And this is kind of how our packaging is looking so far. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is that I thought, okay, we're going to have smaller serving sizes because that'll be more affordable to people. But we actually have demand for much larger serving sizes because families are so large. So especially in certain communities where you just have, they will use a pot of peanut butter in one go. Like one breakfast, it's gone. So we're still very much figuring out how we're going to deliver that.
Do you recycle your bins?
Yeah.
Can they bring their cups back?
So we don't bring the cups back, but these are actually very valued by the people who buy them because they will reuse them in their own homes to put things. So for example, one of the things we see most often is they'll put like sugar in that. So you'll typically buy like a baggie of sugar, and but they like to put that in those kind of things. So any kind of container is usually typically reused by the family. So rather than us trying to kind of recycle them ourselves, with the families typically just use them.
Does he have a sandwich in his hand?
Yes, that is a peanut butter sandwich, and that's in one of our preschools. So we use the product directly in our preschools, but it's also something that we're trying to spread to other families.
What sort of bread?
So because it was a Portuguese colony, Mozambique actually has this kind of like system of bakeries in the towns. So not as much in the rural areas, but in the towns you'll have bakeries that only make one thing, which is this bread. So it's not like a diverse array of breads or pastries. It's like one thing that is mass produced. But that's a common thing that they will eat for breakfast.
Is it a white bread?
Yeah, it's just a plain white bread. So as you can imagine, eating a plain white bread with peanut butter is a lot more nutritious.
Are there any peanut allergy problems like we created in the US?
Not that I have encountered so far. I'm hoping that people who do have those peanut allergies already know them, because peanuts are already consumed pretty widely in Mozambique, just not as peanut butter. So typically what people do with peanuts is they kind of mash them and either just boil them or put them in a stew. And so I mean, we have had our peanut butter tested to make sure that it's safe and doesn't have any like microbial issues or anything. But in terms of allergens, I don't know. I haven't really come across that as much. And the thing is that peanut butter is also something that is very much promoted from the hospitals in Mozambique as a product for really acute malnutrition.
Yeah.
So even if you'll see sometimes in like really even like war-torn areas where you're seeing humanitarian relief and like kids getting this product called plumpy nut, which is a product actually made mostly in the US that is basically peanut butter with some like vitamins and minerals in it. Because peanut butter is so caloric and has so much good fat and good protein that it's really, really important. So you see the hospitals really promoting it as well. But there's no peanut butter actually made locally in Mozambique, based on our kind of market assessment.
Other than yours?
Other than
Okay,
ours,
okay.
yeah. So the other peanut butter that exists is imported from other countries, and it's very expensive. So we wanted to create something that would actually be more affordable, and that's why we're making it. So.
I have a question about your preschool teacher that you were
Yeah.
pictured with. She was holding a doll. Did she make that?
No, I actually brought it for her.
Oh.
So they do use like variety of, like they try to use as much as they can kind of like from the local community. We try to provide them some props and some things to make it exciting, but I just brought some things when I went this last October. So yeah. Another way we're using the peanut butter is just in porridge. So this is just to show how you can make a basic maize porridge something much more delicious actually and nutritious by putting peanut butter in it. And it's really, we had a kind of a demo workshop one day, and it was very widely received, and even these like more elderly women were like licking out the bottom of the plate after finishing it. So this is our team right now. As you can see, kind of the broader group, including Roberto, Talvina. Roberto's dad on the right-hand side is our driver actually for the truck that we take out, and our mentors, our ag folks, and everybody. And that is the end of the presentation because I wanted to make sure and leave more time for questions.
Yay.
Yeah.
The farmers look like, is water an issue over there? Because they seem like the irrigation was pretty good.
Yeah, so it's very arid in that they don't get a lot of rainfall, but they do have, they're on kind of downstream by a lot of rivers. And so if you can get close to a river and if you have irrigation equipment, then you're good. So depending on the rainfall is very difficult, but if you can access the canals and the rivers, then yes, the water is accessible. Yeah.
You mentioned that you went back in October, and so what do you do during the rest of the year?
Yeah, so my current full-time job is working at the Gates Foundation. I work for the Gender Equality Division at the Gates Foundation in Seattle. And it's actually been a really interesting experience because I always find ways to kind of meld those two pieces of work. So I will find out about a project happening in the Gates Foundation. I'm like, oh, we should do that. Or hey, who can I talk to there that can then feed into our work? So for example, for the mentorship program, we had to develop a curriculum, right? Because like I don't know what to be mentoring girls on. This is not something that I have experience in. But through my work at the Gates Foundation, I found another organization that is doing something similar in another country. So I was able to reach out to them and kind of borrow their curriculum and apply it for our work in Mozambique. So,
Cool.
yeah.
The picture that you had with there were so many kids crammed into that school, is it just one teacher
For the secondary, so
for that one class?
for the number of kids in the classroom.
Right.
Yes, it's typically, so each school, it depends on the number of students, but you'll have, usually one teacher will teach like 1 or 2 grades, but they have an afternoon session and a morning session. So in that classroom, yes, it would have just been one teacher. Yeah. They have like the technical cap, I think is 60 students per teacher is the like official ratio, but it goes beyond that. So in practice. Yeah.
Is there healthcare being talked about, other than the girls getting their lessons of?
Yeah, so there are some community health workers. There's other NGOs in that area that do a lot more on the health side, especially around HIV/AIDS, because that's a big issue in the communities. So you get some stuff around that. You get some work around like just basic vaccinations and that kind of thing. There are health clinics here and there, but access to health services is definitely a challenge. And it's one of those things that we work mostly with children, and so we really try to focus on more of the nutritional and growth aspects of health, but there are definitely other issues that are not being attended. Yeah.
Those beets look so healthy. Do they have to fertilize, or are there natural nutrients in soil there?
A little bit of both. So for some of the crops, they will use fertilizer at a certain part of the year, especially if it has been stressed by like some pest has gotten in there. They'll sometimes apply fertilizer, but even without fertilizer, the soil is very, very good for producing these crop vegetables like beets, like carrots. We also started growing this year. Again, because this is just something that these are crops that are not commonly grown there, but they do exist. And basically, we went in there and we're like, wow, beets grow really well. What's like a beet? Okay, carrots. If they grow in the earth, they're a root vegetable. Let's try carrots. And so we kind of just try things and see what works. It's really been our approach to seeing, okay, how do we make a difference in these communities.
How do you set a pay scale, like to pay the teachers and the drivers, and just how's their economy work there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to clarify, we pay the preschool teachers because the preschool program is not part of the government system.
Okay.
The primary schools, those are all paid, the teachers are all paid for by the government. Those are government teachers. We don't really manage the teachers themselves. So the people that are being paid by our organization are the preschool teachers, the school bus drivers, the cooks. Yes, those are kind of the three main. And this is something where I really have to kind of defer more to Talvina and Roberto, because Roberto was head of human resources for a large organization, kind of understands how these contracts work. But just to kind of give like a sense of what that is, the preschool teacher in Anacata, she makes about $90 a month, and that's considered a good job. And so it's obviously we have the exchange rate makes a difference too. So how much you can buy with $90 in Mozambique is very different than how much you can buy for $90 in the U.S. The cooks actually are paid for in a food basket, and this has been an interesting conversation, because I've been like, well, it would just be easier if we just paid them in money than like put together a food basket that we deliver to them each month. But the cooks actually really wanted a food basket and not money, and part of the reason is because of inflation and price changes. And so if you have a food basket, then you have a constant amount that you can depend on each month, rather than not knowing how much this amount of money will buy each month. And also the food baskets save them from having to travel to town and travel far distances to actually buy the things they want. So the food basket includes like rice, beans, peanuts, sugar, cooking oil, soap, and tea. And that was designed by Talvina, and she's like, I know what they want. Because like she spends a lot of time with them. She like lives in, goes and visits them on like a personal basis. They have like several of them have had children that are then named after her, and so she knows them very well. And the cooks also, one thing I just want to say is like we also, while the wages are not high, one of the reasons that it's valued is because it's very stable. And so because these are almost all women, they also all have rights to maternity leave, and they get paid during their maternity. And so that's something that's really important, because a lot of these women are single women, so they're the ones providing for their families. Yeah. Yeah, but
Carol, what would be the prospects for the girls who are going to high school? What will be a next step for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like, that's our next frontier. Because right now, most of the students on the school bus are in the 8th grade, because they're all the student, nobody's really made it up to higher grades to be able to be finishing those later grades. So I think 90% of them are in 8th grade. And our hope is that we'll be able to provide this and see them go all the way through 12th grade. So 4 years from now, when I'm talking to you, will be maybe a different story. But there's that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out, like what are the pathways. So I think there are certain jobs that are like defined tracks, like becoming a teacher, becoming a nurse, becoming a policewoman, are like very common jobs that people would like because they're government paid and they're stable jobs, and people really, aspire to that. In a country like Mozambique, though, you don't have a lot of formal jobs, where you have, big companies. And so a lot of people's work is informal work. They're starting their own little business. They're sewing clothes. They're selling something. And I think that even in those kind of work, having a bit more education is really helpful because you can actually do your accounts better. You can understand a lot of kind of different things that you just don't get when you end your education at 7th grade. If you think about 7th grade, it's not really that much education, especially in these communities. And so I think that'll be another great thing. I'm like, oh, our next program is going to be figuring out, how to transition into jobs and that kind of thing. But the other thing I would just say about that is just even if you don't think about it from a jobs perspective, I think there's just value in having that education for its own right. Especially for girls, because it honestly just also delays them getting married and delays them getting pregnant. And so just that in its own, if that was our only objective, is to delay, the first pregnancy to 18 instead of 15, that makes a huge difference for that woman and for her subsequent children. So, yeah.
So, have you attended the secondary schools at all? And what kind of classes are they offering that prepare these kids for maybe a pathway later?
Yeah, so I have the secondary school, they all kind of funnel to this one secondary school. So the secondary school itself is very big, and one of the reasons that they're not more widespread in Mozambique is because they offer a lot of subjects and the teacher requirements are much, much higher. So they are teaching them, all of the sciences, all of the humanities, writing, mathematics, all kind of, honestly, the same subjects that you would have in high school here. Maybe not, they even have PE, actually. The picture that was up with them was they were wearing white shirts because that was their PE class. And I'm like, they walk to school, they don't need PE. But they do, I guess. So they have those similar subjects, and that's one of the challenges in expanding the high school level to more rural areas, is because it requires a lot more teachers and a lot more infrastructure. But they also have courses that are, I guess, more specific to Mozambique, like they have an entrepreneurship course, and then they have an agriculture course, which is, again, kind of funny because a lot of these kids come from farming families, but doing agriculture, you can do it, in a lot of different ways. And so they do try to give some of those basic skills. Yeah?
Oh, since you just mentioned that you have most of the kids in the high school program in the 8th grade, next year they will be in the 9th grade, but you will have a new batch of 8th graders, and then next year, so it will be constantly growing, at least for these first 4 years.
Yes.
But year on year basis, and you're already at capacity, so.
Yes. So that's why next year we're currently in the process of adding another school bus to our program. It's actually a much bigger school bus and able to take about 50 kids at a time. So the school buses also make a bunch of trips. So because you have the morning session and the afternoon session, those drivers make that trip about 8 times each day. And so some of the kids, we had a problem because some of the drivers were starting to get the kids at 4 in the morning. And we're like, no, you can't do that. We also had another case, this is all in the beginning, when we had one of the school bus drivers who's got too many kids, it's not fitting. So he took out all the seats out of his bus and he just put a mattress down. It's you can fit better. And they're like, no, you can't do that, it's not safe. So there's been those kind of working through that. Yeah.
Are they tested at different levels to figure out if they are really gaining any information and all this?
Yeah.
Since classes are so crowded.
Yeah, so they have, they always have exams at the end of the year. It's a very kind of exam-heavy system, and so to pass to the next grade, especially between levels, you have to pass these, national level exams. So that's at the 5th grade, at the 7th grade, at the 10th grade, and the 12th grade. You have these, fairly important standardized exams at the national level that if you don't pass, you have to repeat that grade. And so we do look at that because we want to see, is the school lunch actually helping them learn more? They're going to school more, are they learning more? And we've seen about a 25% increase in the pass rates of the 5th grade, for example. So it does seem to be actually improving learning. Yeah.
I'm wondering about, think I remember some devastating floods at a certain point in Mozambique, and I'm wondering about climate change and what kind of impact you've seen.
Yeah. So when I first went to Mozambique in 2013, it was because of devastating floods. So even Talvina, like the floods had come in, she was like on top of her roof for like a week because the flood waters were so high. So what happens is actually a lot of the rain happens upstream, and then it just comes as a deluge downstream to where this community is. It's kind of a what would we call it? It's like a floodplain or something. What is it? It's a plain,
Coastal plain.
A coastal plain. It's kind of this region is kind of considered a coastal plain. So it's like only maybe like 100 or 200 feet above sea level, and so that's definitely an issue. From my side, from my perspective, though, I think where you see climate change really having a difference is the like irregularity of rainfall in the rainy season. So that's been really challenging for a lot of farmers. Is that they're depending on the rain for their farming, but the rain is now very irregular. One time I was there in November last year, and it hailed this big, and kind of just destroyed, like some really weird things that you wouldn't really be seeing pre-climate change, and so that's definitely an issue. And that's one of the reasons why the farming with irrigation is so important, because it allows you to not depend on the rain so much. So it is kind of one of those climate change mitigating strategies.
And they're producing crops year round.
They produce with the irrigation. They produce crops mainly from March to October, and then there's this period in between, from about November to February, that it's just really hot, and the productivity of growing is just much lower. So you could grow, but your productivity is much lower, and the yields just generally don't make it worth it. So.
How much do you work with the government for the various programs that you do? Are they involved and do they fund things?
Or are they a hindrance?
No, the government is not a hindrance. The government is basically very under-resourced. So the government loves any kind of support that comes, because the government itself does not have hardly any funding to provide even enough teachers. As you see, like the number of students in those classrooms is very, very high because there's not enough teachers, just because of the government's funding. So the government, I think one time they gave us pots for the schools, for the school lunches. That was, I think, the one financial contribution that they have made. I don't know why they decided to do it then. But they do collaborate with us in terms of identifying the schools. They obviously work with the teachers, and so they are our touch point for that. And they also do run other kinds of health campaigns like deworming and vaccinations that are in our schools, and we work with them on that too. So I'm seeing the clock, and I'm happy to talk with anybody who wants to talk further after this. This is obviously something I care a lot about. I truly just feel that it's something that has kind of grown from the ground up, just kind of seeing where there's opportunity and seeing where we can make a difference. And for me, that's been the most impactful thing, is just seeing this work happen and realizing that it wouldn't we just tried to do something. We didn't have a perfect vision or a perfect plan, and I think that's part of having faith, that you work hard and you have a good heart, and things will happen. And so just really grateful for all the support we've had in doing this, and happy to talk to anybody else who wants to talk one-on-one or afterwards. So.
And it's almost